Uh, we have a full agenda today, and I want to save as much time as possible to hear from our presenter, Gary Horton. It's 9 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. My name is James Kniblich, Director of Development at College of the Canyons Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you. Today is a Chancellor Circle virtual business briefing, and of course it is hosted by the College of the Canyons Foundation. And this has been a series of Zoom calls related around the pain points of business in the COVID-19 crisis. This is our final and 7th presentation, a formal presentation in a weekly series that we began in April. We look forward to sharing our upcoming plans with you in the next few minutes for our next event, next virtual event. In the chat, you'll be receiving shortly a YouTube link of all of our past presentations, as well as that's the location that this talk today will be later this afternoon. Well, on behalf of the College of the Canyons Foundation and our Chancellor, who is on the call today, and would love to hear from her if she'd like to say a few words, it's my pleasure to begin today. I wanted to take a moment and underscore the reason the Chancellor Circle exists. And of course, we are more than just simply a group of businesses or community leaders, although that is certainly one thing that we are, and we're very proud of the community that's grown up around the Chancellor Circle. But together we support innovation and provide life-changing opportunities for students. Each year we're able to support the Chancellor Circle and Foundation a variety of initiatives, and that's things that have included has been the First Year Promise program, the culinary education, support for homeless students or formerly foster youth. The list really does go on and on. One thing I'd like to underscore today is that in just a few days, our faculty will finish completing their 2020 to 2021 mini grant applications. And these are $1,000 mini grants that go to our faculty for innovative ideas and to support student success. Chancellor Circle members make this happen. And to date, we've awarded over 150 mini grants to the foundation. So thank you again. Thank you to our members who have given year after year and really do amazing work in supporting our students in the College of the Canyons. Next, I wanted to share, before we introduce Mr. Horton, I wanted to share that the next event that we're going to be looking at will be June 19th. And we're going to kind of culminate and around the COVID-19 talks that we've been having over the last 7 weeks, and a Chancellor Circle roundtable discussion. And we'll be highlighting some of our past presenters, as well as some local business leaders. And this format, and with any luck, some additional ideas, will be a place that we can meet at least monthly going forward, and hopefully well into the time period that we get to have COVID-19 our rearview mirror. But we've really enjoyed being able to get together virtually with our members. It's very convenient, and it's been a source of community and help, I believe. Well, today we, of course, are grateful to bring on Gary. As we get started, I encourage you to ask questions. You can share those questions in the chat, in that chat box that you just click on right in that black bar on the bottom of your screen. As we go along, most of you will be muted. That just cuts back on interference. You can easily unmute yourself through Zoom. Just press that little microphone button. And if you are calling in on the phone, you can easily unmute yourself by pressing *6.
Well, James, that picture was taken back when you could get a good haircut.
No. We're all feeling that. I know we all need haircuts. So let me introduce Mr. Gary Horton, and then Jill Milady is going to say a few words, and we'll let Gary take it over. Gary is welcome to today's virtual business briefing and has served as founder and CEO of Landscape Development since 1982. He is a compassionate and thoughtful leader, a supporter of many local nonprofits, including the College of the Canyons Foundation and Henry Mayo Newhall Hospital. Gary is a fellow Chancellor Circle member. And just a year ago, we were actually celebrating at his home as a special Chancellor Circle member garden party. He was very gracious to host us. In 2006, Gary Horton's company, Landscape Development Incorporated, was experiencing massive growth with annual revenue of $93 million, growing more than 25% per year. Yet with the coming of the 2007-2008 recession, his company, along with the entire nation, faces significant economic downturn. Revenue fell and employee numbers shrunk. But I'm not here to tell you Gary's story. He's here to do that. So I assure you, we have much to learn from his perseverance and wisdom. Among the many areas I've grown to admire Gary and his company, his values of his helping people as employees and others, and leading from a place of respect and servant leadership are certainly things that come to mind. Gary studied finance at Cal State University Northridge and earned his MBA from Loyola Marymount University, but it has since continued his education by studying at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business, completing an intensive 5-week advanced management program for senior leaders. As you can tell, we have a lot to learn from Gary and his story. Before I hand it over to Gary, I'd like to introduce Jill Mulady, Chairwoman of the Chancellor Circle Steering Committee, and incoming co-chair of the COC Foundation Board of Directors, to say a few words and welcome Gary to present. Take it away, Jill.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you are all doing well. I'm really happy to have Gary Horton here this morning, and when he and I spoke about what he could be talking about at this morning's event, I was really inspired that he would share with us trials and tribulations and how he got through the Great Recession about 10 years ago. And that was a lot different than what we're experiencing now. So I thank you, Gary, from the bottom of my heart. And I thank you also for being a wonderful Chancellor Circle member and a community philanthropist and helping so many great causes. So thank you very much for being here. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. I also want to just turn it over to Dr. Van Hook just for a few minutes, and she's going to say just a few words before we introduce Gary. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes? Okay, so thank you very much. I appreciate you turning it over to me, and I particularly would like to thank Gary for doing this session. One of the things that I don't think that we pay enough attention to when we get into a crisis is how vulnerable people become. And everybody's trying to trudge on and keep going and look strong. And I think people are strong, but also just as with our students, everybody who's out there trying to figure this out, something we've never, ever, ever even imagined experiencing, and hopefully won't have to do so again in the very near future, is struggling. They have fears, they have doubts, and really what keeps them going, certainly other people help. What helps our students is other people saying, I know you can do that, Jill. I just know you can. Don't give up. Don't throw in the towel. Hang in there and stay on the path. But it's hard. The thing that really keeps people going is what they have inside of them, what they tell themselves they're willing to do, they're capable of doing, they need to learn to do, and what really every choice they make every hour of every day predicts what will be the result. So I want to thank you, Gary, for telling your story. It's not easy. It's not easy for anybody to say, I had trouble. I didn't know what I was going to do. But it's so incredibly important for others to see that the people they admire, the people who are leaders, the people who step up, the people who stay in, have had that struggle, and through their personal journey, they made it through. So I just wanted to thank you very much for being willing to do that. Not too many are.
Thank you, Dr. Van Hook. Okay, we'll turn it over to Mr. Gary Horton.
All right, here we go. Thank you all for the very kind words. It's quite flattering. So I was asked to talk about the traits and the abilities and the aspects that will help business people here get through the COVID-19 challenge and experience. This is obviously huge, and it's obviously open-ended. We still don't know exactly what's going to happen. It seems like we're past the worst of it, but there can be second waves. There can be financial implications that we didn't anticipate. All of a sudden, we have Hertz Rent-A-Car filing bankruptcy, and the trickle down and the waves and the currents that come from this are going to be probably long lasting. I want to be sensitive to how each of us is facing what's coming at us. You know, some of us have been hit with this instantly, just a total shock and awe. It happened overnight. Our businesses were flattened. Others are seeing more of a slow moving train wreck kind of a thing. Our own business is doing okay right now because we were deemed essential. However, I can look 3 or 4 months down the road and see new construction projects may not happen, right? And so for us, the challenge may be quite serious later in the year. We will all face it differently. And as Dr. Van Hook mentioned, then we have students and we have family members and people that aren't in business but are still impacted by this. So it's huge and it's wide, and above all, it's personal. I'm going to share with you some stories today, but I don't really want them to be about me. I want them to be about the stories and the people that were involved in them and how they overcame their challenges. I'm going to use a lot of slides, a lot of pictures, which is probably more fun than looking at me. And so I'm going to change the screen over to my slide deck. And I'm told that on Zoom, you can manipulate things around and make me bigger or smaller, whatever you'd like to do. You can turn me off altogether. But let me mess with this, and we'll go to the slideshow and talk about resiliency and how we get through personally these crises, right? It ultimately, we have to have the resolution to do it, the resolve. And the deeper these things go, the longer they drag on, the tougher it is on the individual, and the more important it is for us to be cognizant of how we can counter this wear and tear and remain productive and progressive. So let me go over here and share my screen. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to play this. Share. It said screen sharing failed to start.
Again?
James, do you see it?
Not yet.
Uh-oh.
Let me try it one more time.
Okay, let's do that one more time. Excuse me for this. Okay, I'm back in front of you, right?
Yes.
Okay, screen share. Hit that.
Now we can see it.
Okay, great. And now I'm going to go here and I'm going to say play. We good?
Looks great.
All right.
Thank you.
So title of my presentation is Embracing Resilience in the Face of Challenge, or how to get to the other side of COVID-19 with your head and your business intact, right? How are we going to do that? There's some objectives to this. So I want to start with the end in mind. And this is what we're going to try to do. We're going to frame and balance all of our life challenges and put COVID-19 into perspective. How does this really, in the real world, relate to what our lives are about? Create greater empathy for others. In sharing the stories, I'm hoping that your heart will be open to those around you, because so many of us are being impacted, and increased emotional intelligence about their condition can be very helpful. You're not alone. In sharing my story and the stories of others here, you'll see that although this can feel so personal, really we're all in it together and in different ways, but still all in it. Maybe some inspiration for you to overcome your personal hardship, whatever that might be, to expand your resiliency and what's involved in resiliency. What are the components of it? What do we have to work on? And then ultimately, hopefully to motivate to a spirit of continual self-renewal. The coming out of the recession in the end required me to kind of rebuild almost everything in my life, from my self-esteem to my business and the stuff and the toys we had around us. They kind of all had to get rebuilt. And I had to keep going back to that trough of self-renewal and learn to make that a practice. I actually had assignments on this presentation. One was the road to self-renewal. The other one was about resiliency. I hope you take the time to read them. They're really helpful. I think we sent out the download links. So if you have 20, 30 minutes, that's probably one of the better 20, 30 minutes you could spend. Resiliency, the ability to withstand the shock, often completely unexpected, changes, challenges, hardships, and to successfully adapt and survive that. But not only that, to come out of it intact, body and mind, and hopefully in the case of COVID-19, those of you that have businesses, come out with your business intact and maybe even thriving better than before. This is the great lead-in sentence from The Road to Self-Renewal. It is a puzzle while some men and women go to seed, while others remain vital to the very end of their days. And that's what we wish for all of you, that we remain vital through the end of our days, and particularly through this event and this challenge that's both local and global. I hope this is conversational. I'm going to walk through these things. It's not overly practiced. Please, if you have any questions, bring them up, and let's share some stories. So I'm doing this through a series of 3 stories that in their own way are related to the experiences that we're going through now. The first one I call pandemic. This is a picture of my grandfather, William. He was about 32 at the time, and I think the year was 1916. He had just married Emma on his lap, and I think at the time of this picture, she was pregnant with what would be her first child, my father, Donald. They're in upstate New York near the Hudson, where they worked, and I think life was pretty good. My family back then worked the Hudson River. My great-grandfather shipped things up and down the river into New York. He had an ice business. I guess he did pretty well. William, my grandfather, had a fish market. And so they got married, they're off, they're doing fine. And life appeared to be pretty good. If you look at the date on the bottom of the picture, it's 1918, May 1918. And there's William. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. He's out on the Hudson someplace, and life is good. May 1918. That 1918 date should ring a bell with you guys by now. This picture was taken in October of 1918, and this is William's widow, and that's my father, who is now himself fatherless. William died in the flu pandemic of 1918. A 32-year-old guy, perfectly healthy, became one of the 75,000 people that died in New York City. Emma later went on to say that in the apartment where they lived, on a certain day, so many people died, they just stacked the bodies up outside outside on the sidewalk like cordwood. So this pandemic raged through New York, and it raged through my family at the time. In the end, 750,000 or so Americans died, and it's estimated that 60, 70 million died worldwide, to put our current pandemic into some perspective. So Emma, now a widow, was pregnant, it turned out, with my uncle, Robert. And so in 1919, she doesn't have a husband. It's at the end of World War I, and she has 2 small kids. Without a husband to support her, she ended up working in a lampshade factory in Brooklyn. And I can't imagine what a lampshade factory in 1920 in Brooklyn would be like, but it would have to be a sweatshop, and it would have to be pretty tough. And the kids did, in fact, grow up pretty poor. Here's a picture 5 or 6 years later, my father, my uncle, and Emma. And as you can tell, that it looks a little hard scrabble. I think they probably wore those shorts for a couple of summers, maybe 3 or 4. They were casual before casual was cool. I really like the socks. So here they are making their way. Pretty tough row of it post-war without a dad. And the next thing that comes up for them in 1929, 4 years later, it's the Great Depression. By then, my dad's about 10 years old. My uncle's 8 or so. And the Great Depression, of course, was worse than the Great Recession, and it lasted for 10 years. Through that time, my father and my uncle did get educated in the New York school district, and I think it was pretty good at the time. My father wrote in his high school signature book, you know, they used to do that. I don't know they do that anymore, where the kids hand out these things and everybody write notes to one another when they graduated, that he had hopes to attend Yale. And but then something happened that stopped that, and that was World War II. So now my dad's in the young 20s and my uncle's in his young 20s. This is a picture of my uncle being trained in South Carolina. He ended up fighting in Guadalcanal, perhaps the bloodiest battle in the Pacific in World War II. And he was stuck on that island for 6 months, attacking and under attack. My father served in a non-combat role in Europe. So these kids that first grew up without a dad and then faced the Great Depression, just as they're hoping to go to college and do something great, got drafted and boom, into World War II, some of it the worst fighting. Somehow they made it through. And this is a picture, a very happy picture of my dad in the middle with my mom, which is on the left of the picture, and my aunt, Aunt Jeff, who was married to Robert, and they're out on the boardwalk someplace in New York. And my dad is carrying my oldest sister, Barbara. They made it through. They somehow toughed it out. Through all that, they got in their guts the way to just power it through. Here's my Uncle Bob. Eventually, Bob and Don decided, you know what? We're going to make California our home. And like so many other people, they immigrated to the San Fernando Valley, which is where I grew up. And here they are looking rather dapper. And I think you can tell that's a San Fernando Valley kind of a look, Los Angeles look. And that's Barbara, my oldest sister, in between. Bob later went on to become an executive at Peterson Publishing in Los Angeles. They do all those cool car magazines. My dad struggled a little bit more with employment, and I'll get to that in a moment. So this is Bob with my grandma, Emma. And while he was fighting in the Pacific, he got a letter from the military that said he needed to come back and help his mom. She had come down with some kind of a disease that they couldn't put a finger on, but she was becoming paralyzed and losing the ability to move and to speak. And they didn't know what it was. And he came back home to care for her. Later, eventually she was sent to a public sanatorium and hospital where they continued to try to treat this problem, where she had lost motor control, but they didn't know why. It was an unknown disease at the time. So my dad and my uncle got to care for her, fighting this unknown disease. It turns out the disease is known as Jacob's ataxia, and it's genetic, and it was passed down to my father. My grandmother died at about 50. My father died at 59 from this disease, and in both cases, it's like Lou Gehrig's, and it took 10 or 15 years for them to actually die, where they slowly become paralyzed, and in the end, they're motionless, can't talk, but their brain cognitively is 100%. It's a hellacious disease, awful, where you're trapped inside your own body. So this was horrific, and first my dad and uncle had to care for their mom, and then I got to care for my dad. This is my sister Barbara and my brother-in-law Sandy. And Barbara was vivacious and very talented. This is her daughter, Stacy. And unfortunately, when Stacy was 6 and Barbara was 35, she went into a hospital, not Henry Mayo, for flu symptoms, and she became infected with staph infection that went to her heart, and she died in the hospital at 35. So Stacy at 6, kind of like my father, entered life without a mom, and her brother Ryan the same. And Carrie and I got to help care for them as they grew up. So the bad luck continued. This is my beautiful sister Kathy, her graduation photo. And Kathy didn't win the lottery, and she picked up the same genetic disease as my dad, as his mom. And like my dad, she died at 59. She worked for the LAPD in records, and she did it until the very end, where she couldn't perform her duties anymore for lack of motor control. And at about 40, she was forced into retirement. And we were able, at that point in time, to care for her and keep her in her own home and have a full-time caregiver, which unfortunately wasn't my dad's lot. So this genetic disease was passed through all of these people's lives. And I'm happy to say, I can hold my hands out here and they don't move. That plague passed me by. I won the lottery and I didn't get that disease. It's dead in our family now, because if you don't have it, you can't pass it on. So none of my kids have it, and neither did Barbara's. So I tell you this long story of trials, many of them overcome, that there's always twists and turns in life, always. And there's always floors that drop out. And that's just the way life is. And getting through back to normal requires tremendous resiliency, like a guy fighting and going down, coming back to start a family. And you have to use all the resiliency tools at hand to make it sometimes, particularly when those trials go over a long period of time. This is the real normal in life. Change, challenge, unexpected stuff, even as big as COVID-19, is the real normal. It happens all the time. And let me show you something. Let me go here. Look at what we've all already overcome. If you're about my age, you've seen all of this. Cuban Missile Crisis, the presidential assassinations, riots, 2 earthquakes. One of them hit here really good. Stagflation, inflation, .com, 9/11, Y2K, Great Recession. Perhaps you've lost loved ones. Perhaps you've had illnesses and setbacks. And we've all made it through. So this just happens. It's life. Get used to it. And we're going to have the resolve to get past it, including COVID-19, which might be our Great Depression. It might be akin to our personal World War II. It could be very big. So the variables that contribute to resiliency in yourself, let's take a look at this. Some people are just born tougher, right? That's biology. But beyond that, we can control the rest of it. A self-awareness what are our strengths and weaknesses, and what do we have to be careful with and work on? Self-regulation. When we're under pressure, can we stick to our values, right? Can we not get into trouble? Can we focus on what we have to do? Mental agility. Know that when you're under stress, your mind's going to be challenged. And so we have to feed it, and we have to continue to learn, and we have to sharpen our skills. Optimism. Boy, the worst thing is giving up or depression. So we have to do whatever it takes to keep up in a realistic sense. And that might be getting sunlight. It might be hanging out with friends. It could be doing good things, whatever it takes to keep ourselves up. Self-efficacy and mastery. Continue to improve your skills. Know that we are on a road to self-renewal, and stick to that even in tough times. Connection. More than ever, when we're under stress, and many of us are, and the separation that we've had right now with social distancing makes it even tougher, connection with other people. Stay connected, because in groups we support one another. And finally, positive institutions. That can be church. It could be supporting the college, right? It could be hanging out at the coffee shop with your buddies. Go and work in the places where they reinforce you and buck you up. And you're going to need all these things when push comes to shove in these really tough situations. This is a great quote. More than education, more than experience, more than training, a personal level of resilience will determine who succeeds and who fails. And that's true in the cancer ward, it's true in the Olympics, and it's also true in the boardroom. Resilience, as much as anything, will determine, do we in fact make it out to the other side? Can we carry the weight the whole time? So I'm here to exhort this. Have faith in yourself. Have faith in your leadership. Know that this will pass. I just gave you a list of 15 or 16 terrible things that have happened in our lifetimes alone, and we made it through it. This will pass too. It always does. And remember to brush up on these resiliency skills, because you're going to need them. You will need them in COVID-19. Okay, second story. How am I doing on time? I've got a little bit of time. The Great Recession, or how I could have lost far, far more than I did. This is my company. We're based in Valencia, landscape development. It's 37 years old. We moved to Valencia roughly 25 years ago. We're out on Witherspoon Parkway if anybody wants to drive by and say hello. I started this company early on. It's 37 years old, and I'm going to be 64 this month. I married young. I was 23. This is my dear wife, Carrie. She was 19 when I married her. And we had, and this is me when we're just getting started. And look at that. That's the young version of me. What a sharp, handsome guy. And so that's how we get started. It's, you know, it's very humble. A guy and a computer and some ideas and a dream, and you work it and you work it and you work it. And I did. At the same time, we were raising a family quickly. This is my son, Jonathan. He was born 9 months and 3 days after we were married. We were good kids, followed all the rules, and out popped John, and he's an absolutely wonderful kid. We have 3 kids, John, Chris, and Katie, and you'll hear more about Katie in a moment. So we're raising a family, we're running a business, and this is what an early version of landscape development looks like. You'll know if you've seen the trucks around town, and there's a lot of them, right? The big panel box trucks that do maintenance. We've improved a little bit on our image and on the safety gear and personal protective equipment and what we do. But this is how it starts, you know, humble beginnings. Those trucks, by the way, used to cost us $4,999 brand new, the Mazda V2000 trucks. This gentleman here, you can't see, I don't think you can see my cursor, but the person to my left, Ruben Gonzalez, is still with us 38 years later. And he's got 1 or 2 more years till retirement. So while this was all going on, I was working on my education at the same time. I was the first and only person in my family to graduate college. My dad never did get the chance to do his dream at Yale. That one got crushed. But I went to school at James Monroe High School. CSUN was down the way. I was so ignorant of things at the time, I didn't even know what a UCLA was or a UC. But I did know that there was this place called CSUN down the way, and my first semester cost about $110 for the whole semester. And so I started really when I at 19 and eventually graduated at 28 because I ended up going to night school. This is my mom, and you can see the beam in her eyes. She's so happy that after all this stuff she went through with her husband being sick and everything else, that she's got a son and he graduated college. So it's a really fun picture. And my mom was aces. She was wonderful. Same time, we're working and we're putting all our effort into the business. And this is our first real facility, and it's up on Castaic Road. And we thought this was just absolutely fabulous when we finally could afford to move a trailer onto a dirt lot that we bought. And so here's landscape development 25 years ago. We even had a paved parking lot, which I thought was swell. Later, we moved that trailer and we developed a mini storage on the land, and that's called all locked up self-storage, if you've heard of it. It's still there, we still own it. And that was a good development for us. Meanwhile, I still went to school. I guess I had some gluttony for punishment, and I did an entire MBA at night at Loyola Marymount while we were growing the business and while we were raising the family. And you see my son Jonathan now to my left, beautiful hair, really sharp kid, and it's sad. My two boys are now bald, but look at their hair then. Anyhow, John later followed the example of myself and Carrie. Carrie graduated CSUN. I graduated with an MBA. John ended up going to Berkeley and then got a master's of education in New York, and he's currently finishing up a PhD. And Chris ended up going to Colgate, New York, and for liberal arts education, and he graduated from Cornell with a master's in landscape architecture. And Katie graduated from University of Puget Sound. So one thing I did learn through all this is this idea of investing in yourself, of continuing education, whether it's formal as in college or otherwise, is just so important to remaining vital. We instilled that into our kids, and thank goodness it stuck. And I'm sure Diane will appreciate the plug about the importance of education. Without education, formal education, my life wouldn't be what it is. It's everything, because I grew up rather ignorant. We were kind of poor, not exposed to a whole lot. And I found through formal education, I was able to lift myself up multiple levels in a socioeconomic sense and an awareness and an ability. So I can't plug that enough. If you're feeling under stress, that's a great time actually to invest in yourself, either through reading or classes, online, or colleges back when they opened up. About 20 years ago, after the recession of 92, 95, we purchased a piece of land from Newhall Land in the Valencia Industrial Center by the 126 where it passes over Commerce Center Drive. And some of you might recognize this building because currently it's the Castaic Union School District. Well, I built this building in conjunction with the school district, and basically it was a leaseback sale where we built it. They leased half of it from us for 5 years, and then they bought the entire building from us. So we shared it with the Unified School District. It was a great situation for both of us, and it helped launch LDI into a more formal business setting to where finally we moved to where we are now in Witherspoon. At this time, we were just starting a big ramp up between 2002 and 2006. And by 2006, LDI, Landscape Development, was actually a pretty large company in SCB at the time, going back that far. We had 92 million in revenue and 5 offices and 1,300 employees and trucks everywhere. And we were innovating left and right. And I had all these great ideas coming out of my MBA education. I'm big on total quality management, TQM, and we use that in so many different ways. And along with this, with all this very quick growth, we also were leveraged. And therein was a little problem. We were kind of highly levered. And sometimes when you're growing quickly, you'll use debt to finance that, and we did. Well, and then another floor dropped out. And this is kind of a constant theme, because when you don't expect it, things like what happened then or what's happening now with COVID happen, or what happened with my grandfather in the Spanish flu. This is a graph of housing starts in the United States. And the blue is single family starts, and the red are total starts, including multifamily. And if you look at 2006, way at the top to the right of the graph, there are nearly 2.3 million starts in 2006. And if you follow that free flow crash line down, by 2008, the number was 300 single family and 500 in total, 500,000. That's a drop of 85%. That would be as though for Starbucks, 85% of their customers gave up coffee over a 2-year period of time. And all of a sudden they only had 15% of their customers left. Or for McDonald's, everybody became vegetarian in 2 years. How do you stay in business with that type of a crash, right? And then the rough part of it is, if you can see it on the bottom, it stayed flat for another 4 or 5 years. We had this crash and it didn't bounce back. This is not a V. And you've heard people talk about the COVID virus. Is it going to be a quick V and we're back, or is it going to be a U? What's it going to be? Well, this was just hell. I don't think it has a V or a U. It was hell. And we bounced around at the bottom, and for 4 or 5 years, housing and construction in the U.S. was just stagnant. And there were implications to that for us. We went through 6 very, very, very long years, and our revenue fell from 92 million to 22 million. Our employee count went from 1,300 to 220, right? We sold off 3 buildings, sold off trucks and tractors. We had so many trucks and tractors lined out, it looked like a dealership. I lost almost all the senior management, which kind of left me feeling alone and exposed. And we lost our market relevance. I personally went 3 years without pay. I put money back into the company. I sold our 2 vacation homes. And along the way, I actually became medically depressed. And I was pretty good through the whole thing. In 2009, I decided I did need some self-renewal, and I signed up and went to the Horton Business School for a month and graduated from their advanced management program. And that was extremely helpful, and it changed my life then, and it still has. But I'm sad to say that just that long drag of everything going so hard finally got to me. And it's a personal story, and I don't think most people would feel comfortable sharing it. But I think it's important to share, because this is a risk that we all face when we're facing things that are so tough as what's in front of us. And for me, that just kind of happened almost suddenly at the start of 2012. All of a sudden I couldn't sleep, and I would go a day or two, and once three whole days without any sleep at all. And then I found it hard to go to work, and I found it hard to talk to people. And finally I thought, you know what, I need to see a psychologist, and I did. And he became alarmed, and he said, you know, you're 1 click away from psychosis. And he said, you know, you're really under a lot of duress. When I told him the whole story, he said, you better see a psychiatrist. And I did, and we went through the attempt at different antidepressant medicines across a 3 or 4 month period of time. And for me, it didn't work. All of them had side effects that were worse than the mental anguish that I was going through. So I gave up on that. but I'm sure it helps many other people. For me, it didn't. But I did keep seeing the psychologist, and it was helpful. And he did give me good practical advice on how to improve my worldview and how to get back to sleep and how to regain positive thoughts instead of just negative thoughts. The problem with getting depressed is it becomes very hard to see sound and positive solutions to problems. All you can see is dark. And that's why it's so dangerous. And if you feel yourself getting depressed, where all of a sudden, or over time, you can't imagine the good, you can't develop positive answers, it's probably time to get help, and the sooner the better. So let me jump here and see. Okay, so something finally happened. It got so bad that I figured I couldn't go on in business. I just didn't want the nightmare anymore. And I decided I was going to sell the business, and at a price that was basically selling it for parts. This was once a very valuable business, and I almost sold it off for about $1 million. And that would have been unbelievably tragic. And something happened when I finally introduced 4 of the remaining kind of mid-level managers, which were the highest level guys that we had, to what I was going to do. They essentially put their arms around me and said, you know what, we don't have to do this. We can give it one more go, and we'll back you up. And if it doesn't go well, we'll stick around until we can close everything out, so everything is orderly. And I finally let these people into my life where I could share my concerns and my anguish and open myself up to working with others with these problems. And there was something about having people just say, look, we're with you and we'll back you up to the end, that very slowly and then increasingly took the darkness away. And through the help of these friends and an incredibly loyal wife, who never once complained, by the way, Carrie never once complained about any of this, even when we were selling vacation homes and the whole bit. That darkness kind of started to lift. And it took about 2 years until I finally started to feel like my old gregarious self. So something happened at the same time. I'll show you that later. Let me go back. So the biggest lessons I learned from the Great Recession, and these are notes you can take down about COVID. Consult very early with your management team about what your situation is and what you need to do, and get very real about actual achievable outcomes. You can't make plans for dreams. It has to be based in reality. Get very real and set the course, and avail yourself of expert counsel in your particular industry. Make sure you get the best advice. And it's really great to have a good bank and a good lawyer and a good accountant behind you. When we were in the depth of our problem and in some financial difficulty, I'm happy to say that our good friends at Mission Valley Bank, local bank, picked us up. They saw promise in what we were doing, and they saw character in that we'd made it through 6 years without defaulting on anyone and keeping all the payments up. And we never did default on anyone through all that stress and all that damage. So Mission Valley Bank picked us up, and we banked with them for 3 or so years, and they came along at just the right time. So I have to thank them very much. You have to act decisively and aggressively and do it early, and make sure that if you have to do cuts or hard changes, try to do it all in one time. Try to do it just once, and make sure that whatever changes you make are sufficient to last through where you think you're going to go. In our case, we didn't know when the bottom was going to happen. This was a 6-year downturn. So we ended up with this drip of cuts every 4 or 5 months, and that's very demotivating to staff. So try to do it just once if you can. hold your business and personal friends close and open up to them. Share your concerns. I wouldn't say be a burden, but when I finally got out of depression, it was when I opened up my heart and let other people closer to help. Any good psychologist would tell you, if you're under duress, get lots of exercise and sunshine and stay in shape. Don't let yourself, get into the habits of bad habits or just out of shape. Sunshine itself is helpful to keep you feeling better, and exercise your mind and keep investing in yourself. When I was looking for a psychiatrist, I visited one office and the guy was great. I wish he would have taken me on, but since I'd already spoken to another one, he deferred and said I needed to go with the first one. I guess they have this professional courtesies. But in any case, he heard me out, and his last words when I was headed out the door was, never, ever make important decisions when you're depressed or over anxious. Don't make important decisions when you're depressed. And unfortunately, I did, and that cost us more than it had to cost us. And I almost lost my company over it because I made a decision to sell it when I was depressed. And later, fortunately, was able to pull back from that. It was a very close call. And had we sold the company because I was depressed, my life would be completely different now. This is very personal, and I've opened up to share it with you because perhaps you're going through some of the same things, and perhaps this might help. So we finally pulled up in 2013 and 2014, and things are going okay, and we're getting profitable. And then, and I see we're running out of time, so I'll push this. My daughter, or how I learned the true perspective about what's really valuable. This is my daughter, Katie. We were on a trip in India with 80 other people to go to this giant wedding that was going to be at a palace. My son, John, met an Indian guy from at Berkeley, and they became friends in a frat. And all these people decided to go together for this guy's wedding. And we were invited, Carrie and I, and our daughter was married to one of those Berkeley guys at the time. So we all ended up there. And this is at the Taj Mahal. Beautiful place. But a lot of India looks more like this. And on the second or third day of our trip, we were to go to the Pink City, ancient city, some 300-year-old street, and they were going to buy saris for the wedding. And I want you to take a look at this because these things feature prominently in the story in a moment. Anyhow, so they're in a store and they're buying saris, and you can see that we're sitting around and there's all the clothes, and it was really fun. And Katie finally found one, and then it was decided they should go down the street to get it tailored. They went down the street, and 5 minutes later, some kid ran into the store screaming, "Your daughter's been hit, your daughter's been hit." And my son John and I, with Katie following, ran down the street, and we found her splayed out on the curb with all kinds of people around her. It looked like a scene from Indiana Jones. And she was completely out of it, eyes rolled back, head bloodied, and no motion, no response. She was comatose and very shallow breathing. There were no ambulances. There were no police. I had a friend in India from Horton, and I was able to call him, and he gave us advice on what hospital to go to. So eventually, we loaded Katie into one of those little tuk-tuks that you saw earlier, with her laying on John's lap and me actually hanging off the back, and went over cobblestone streets. All in all, it took about 70 minutes to get her to the hospital in that condition. And that night, she had brain surgery to remove hematomas, and she ended up in the ICU in a coma for 3 days. And the prognosis was she could either die or be severely retarded, or maybe get out of it in some sort. This is day 4 or 5 when she woke up from the ICU, and she could speak single syllable words, and she did recognize her husband and her brother. And we spent 30 days in India trying to get her well enough to travel. And she really couldn't speak for the first 10 days. And the whole time she was there, she thought she was in a hotel in Vancouver, and she thought the nurses were house cleaners. It was amazing. And she had to relearn to speak. And an interesting thing about this was she couldn't retain a memory day over day. So each day it was like that Groundhog Day. Each day was a brand new day, and she had to learn things all over again. Eventually, we were able to get her out of there, and that's Katie with the hat and the dress. And it took 2 doctors and a private medical jet to fly her first to Delhi, and then 2 doctors to fly her on business class to LA, where she ended up in UCLA for a day. And then she stayed with us for a couple months, where she did cognitive and physical and other types of therapy. This is one of those things that just happened, right? We're going along, things were okay, and boom. But fortunately, unlike what happened to my sisters, she didn't die, and she made it through. This is Katie about 3 or 4 weeks after we got home. And I love this picture because you can see a determination and a resiliency of herself wanting to do better. There's a towel over the display because she said if she looked at the display, she'd get dizzy and fall off the machine. She was a good pianist, trained all her life as a kid here with Jeannie. Many of you might know Jeannie, the piano teacher here. And neurologists said that one of the reasons she was able to bounce back was in fact her training in piano and her advanced education. She had a great boss in Seattle who first let her take the 4 or 5 months off to heal up, and then let her come back to work at 10 hours a week, doing very simple things, and then 15 hours a week. Things like set up a little company store for their company clothes. And he was just great, just super empathetic and helpful to our family. About 2.5 years later, this is Katie, and she's starting to function completely. It took her 2.5, 3 years to come all the way back. And this is Katie about 1.5 years ago. Those teeth are all artificial because she lost them in the accident. A great smile, wonderful, wonderful person. And this is Katie today. She works for Sound Transit in Puget Sound in Seattle, and they build out the light rail system that we wish we had here in LA. And she's taking night courses at University of Washington in project management. And she has a very productive, progressive, dynamic life. And I think she's actually living her very best life now. But she had to work on this for 3, 4, 5 years to pull herself all the way back. And I want to come back to this chart because it tells Katie's story. Self-awareness, she knew where she was, and she knew what she had to regain her person back. She had to fight to get her entire person back, and to stay out of trouble with the self-regulation and the mental agility of taking classes and relearning things. Optimism, people with brain injuries often get depressed. And so she worked very hard on this. She was physical, she ran a lot, she got out in the sun. She hung around people that were very supportive. If we go over here to connection, she actually volunteered with the Seattle Brain Injury Alliance. She joined a reading club, book club, and positive institutions would be for her where she worked and staying close to her family. Put all this together, and across 3, 4 years, we have a person that probably should have died, but instead is living their best life through tremendous resiliency. I can't say enough about Katie's self-mastery in that. We cannot dream of a utopia in which all arrangements are ideal and everyone is flawless. Life is tumultuous, an endless losing and regaining of balance, a continuous struggle, never an assured victory. Nothing is ever finally safe. every important battle is fought and refought. You may wonder if such a struggle, endless and of uncertain outcome, isn't more than humans can bear. But all of history suggests that the human spirit is well fitted to cope with just that kind of world. And I think this kind of sums up where we are now and for most of us in our lives. Nothing is permanent, and everything we face is an endless fight and refight. Life will always throw these things at us. So what happened in landscape development after the Great Recession? We forgot about that part. First of all, I got a whole new perspective on life after the incident with Katie. Look, no matter what life brings to us, if no one died, we're okay. It's not that big of a deal. Business is business, money's money, but life is a whole different thing. If no one died, don't worry, we can get through this. And that realization just freed me of business worry and allows me to be a better executive because I'm not held back by fear. This is what happened. That graph that I showed you before that stayed on the bottom, it finally took off. And you can see the combined starts for the United States going up through 15. And I don't have the chart all the way to 2000, but before COVID-19, I think total housing starts in the US were back up to about 1 million. Still not at the peak, but a substantial recovery from the bottom. And we rode that wave. Last year, LDI was a $100 million company. We have 10 offices from Sacramento to San Diego to Las Vegas, 1,100 employees. And we've developed a very diversified business now. We're not so focused on housing. We're not subject to all the variances in that market. We have a large maintenance company. You see the trucks around here, very big in Ventura, here Santa Clarita, Sacramento. We've made acquisitions of other maintenance companies. And I worked very hard to develop a strong top management team. And now that business can run with or without me. And that wasn't the case before. We do long-term planning, but we're careful about short-term contingencies, and we've developed way stronger finances. So we are, as a company, much more resilient facing the COVID thing than I ever was back in 2006. Those were lessons learned, particularly these last 3 or 4 points, to make sure that we could take the hits of something that always comes up, because there is always something. This is where we were before COVID. Fortunately, we were deemed essential, so we're still working, and it's kind of okay where we are right now. I'm concerned about the long term with will building continue, and we'll make those changes as we need to. I want to leave you with a couple of images. This is kind of what it feels like when you're facing a COVID-19. It's, for many people that are listening here, it just crashed on us. And it looks insurmountable, the despair and the fear. But what I want to leave you with is this image, because this is what we have to do with it. We take the wave and we surf it, right? We take the challenge and we master it, and off we go and create something far better. So these are my final takeaways for business, and that's the end of my 3 stories about resiliency. I hope there's some insights from it.
Thank you very much, Gary, for opening up and sharing your story. I think we can all learn how to be resilient in the COVID-19 pandemic. This was very inspiring and giving us some hope to what's coming ahead of us. I have a question that I think I would appreciate if you could try to answer here. This is from Lori Baker Shenna, and she says, how do you plan for the future, either short or long term, when faced with unprecedented business challenges such as record unemployment, contradictory health info, and uncertain consumer behavior, when there's no roadmap for this?
Boy, that is the question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How do you plan looking into an abyss? That was kind of the situation in 2008 when the banks failed. in less than 2 weeks, when Lehman Brothers went under, we probably had 4 or 5 very large clients BK. And in the end, we were stiffed for $3 million by national companies. I would say, in this case, with as much variability as we have, would be to plan for the most sure result that you can get given those uncertainties. With what's happening in the worst case, what can you do, right? If the worst of what you're fearing could happen, what can you build that will still survive that? What can you build that might thrive in that environment? And build up the plan around that with options, different scenarios of where do you go from there to advance, right? You've got this baseline, the for sure. Now, if it turns out better this way, how can I go here? And should this go better that way? How can I go there? And actually write them down and have them as contingency plans. But you have to have something. The problem I had in 06 through 12 was I really didn't get quickly enough to that baseline of where can we make it for sure. It would have been way easier had we gotten there first and stuck to it. That would be, I know that's somewhat vague, but that's how I would handle that. And I have a lot of empathy for that question.
Yeah, and I think it's always changing. So thank you for that answer. I'm going to turn it over to James, who has a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Gary. I think if everyone just took a picture of that last slide and just stuck it on our office beside our desk, and look at it every day, we would be. Some of the things that kind of stuck with me is kind of this tough-minded optimism and kind of a realistic approach, and that really came through on all 3 of those stories, Gary. I'm gonna read another question that came through, and this really stuck with me as well, as far as a sense of forming community around leaders. Seems a lot of leaders find that they have a limited number of people that they can actually rely on and receive counsel from. Having people around you, how would you recommend building this community and support for a business owner?
Good one. You know what? I joined Vistage in, I think it was around 2010. And that's a group of fellow CEOs where you get together once a month and you go through and you share what's on your plate and what your plans are. And as a group, you critique and brainstorm. And by the way, people from Mission Valley Bank were there, and a couple of other local businesses, and it was really quite helpful. I did that for about 1.5 years. I also used a business coach for about 1 year. Expensive, but worth it. Joining something like Chancellor Circle, where you get to rub shoulders with fellow local business people and like-minded people is very helpful. Volunteering circles too might also be great.
Thank you. And for the sake of time, I have a list of questions we could ask. So I know your email was shared earlier. If someone wants to follow up with Gary, I'm sure he would love to speak with you. If you haven't yet, Gary sent us this article. My personal favorite out of the 2 is the Stanford article that you shared, Gary. And I guess I'll just end with this question. I happen to be able to turn around, and I pulled this book off the shelf, which is referenced in that article as far as from Jim Collins. So let me ask this question. I mean, the author from that article, John Gardner, mentioned Churchill's quote, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." And he's referencing this kind of tough-minded optimism that you kept referencing. Do you have advice to younger business owners or perhaps entrepreneurs who still need to believe in that dream, all the while maintaining that kind of tough-minded optimism?
So this is a real point. You know, for people that are in their 30s, they didn't live through that long list of experiences that I showed. Maybe they remember the earthquake from when they were real little. But I put down 14, 15 things that you and I and everyone else in this meeting actually had to gut through. And so we've learned resiliency and we've learned belief in ourselves through that. Now we have a generation of people that are getting started in business, and this thing came out of the blue and they don't know what to do with it because it's all brand new. And that's one of the reasons I focus so much on resiliency, because it's going to be needed. So what should they do about it? My God, I would say first, get advice from people that have been around the block, right? This is a place where advice from senior executives can be very helpful. The SBA has free advisors. It's something core, I forget the name. Vistage would also be helpful. Reaching out into the SCV EDC. I'm sure Holly can point out coaches that would be helpful. Holly knows everybody, and she would be a good point person. So that's what I would do. But one of those resiliency things was self-awareness, and I think younger managers might need to be aware that they could have some shortcomings, and they need to fill that hole pretty quick.
Well, thank you again, Gary. We really can't thank you enough. I actually saw, I'm not kidding, I saw a couple of you with tears in your eyes.
Well, if you can get them to cry, it's either because it was really terrible or you actually made a point.
No, quite the opposite. So thank you so much.
All right.
Of course, we appreciate Gary just being a great friend of the college. I can't wait to kind of see you around sitting in the Culinary Institute enjoying a good lunch or dinner.
It's good. They're good, by the way. That food's good.
I know that we enjoy having your patronage there as well. But folks, let me thank you for attending this Zoom call with the Chancellor Circle members and Dr. Van Hook and many board members of the foundation. As we end this kind of weekly season and we head toward more of a monthly call, again, mark your calendars for June 19th as we're going to have a larger roundtable discussion. And let me specifically thank some of the people that helped put these on over the last few weeks, including Jill Milady, of course, and Dr. Van Hook. But Nico Cardenas, Stacy Klein, Claudia Dunn Martinez, T. Meyer, Joe Clacco, Jeff Forrest, and many others as well. Thank you for volunteering, for giving back, for helping the business community stay connected, have a sense of community through this crisis. And we appreciate your involvement and your commitment to support the college and the students here as well. So folks, have a great day. Thank you for sticking with us. And thank you, Gary, for sharing your story. It really means the world.
All right. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. And especially to Gary. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.